hope you're having an awesome day. In today's tutorial, we are going to create a jump up and flip animation. So we're going to combine a little bit of the bounce animation, and we're going to also combine flipping an object, doing a backflip in the air. So let's get started. So for this animation, we want to include the squashing of an object before it jumps up to create some anticipation. But in addition, we also want to do a flip. And for the squashing, if you watch the bouncing ball animation, we squashed from the top down, and we did that by moving the anchor point to the bottom of the object. But with the flip, I found that it looked the best, at least for what I wanted to do, where if the object did a flip where the rotation point was closer to the top of the object. So essentially, to do that, I created a way of having two different anchor points in two different positions that we can use by using nulls and a object. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cube for my object to animate, and you could use something else if you'd like to. I'm just going to move it over. I am going to change the size of this roughly something like that, and I'm going to increase the segments. Give it 3 on each axis. I'm just going to move it towards the ground. So I'm also going to come down here to the materials, and I'm going to give it a color. Let's do green. So the first thing I want to do is create a null, and then I'm going to create one more null. And so these two nulls are going to be the position. We're going to use this for an access point to, again, to animate one of them for the squash, and then the other one for our flipping pivot position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move one to the bottom, and so it looks like one's pretty close to the bottom already. I'm going to go over here to my right view, increase that right view by clicking on that little button right there. So I'm going to move this, actually I'll probably just move this cube right down to the ground, and then that null should be there. Let's move it down just a little bit more. This null right here is our bottom null. I'm going to call this the squash position. So we're going to use this null to squash this cube from the top. And then we're going to get this other null. I'm going to scroll out using my scroll wheel, hold the number 1 key to pan, and I'm clicking, holding number 1, the number 1 key. And I'm going to grab that null, and I'm just going to move it up towards the top. So I've tried this a couple different ways. I tried where it was at the very top, and it felt a little weird, and I thought somewhere in this position seemed about right. And the reason for that is I was thinking that it's kind of like if a person was doing a backflip, they're going to be leading with their head, or this area right here seemed to look pretty good for this animation. And of course you could change this later if you really wanted to. If you don't like the way it looks, or just depending on the shape of your object, you can move this around and try different things. I found I liked this area the best for this animation. So I'm going to call this one, that null, the backflip position. This is really important. The order of how we parent and child this chain here, I'm going to go back to the perspective mode, is important. We need to put the squash position on the top, and then the backflip position underneath that, and then the cube underneath that. So your hierarchy should look like this. So we don't want any of these right next to each other, so it's a parent-child relationship. So the backflip is a child of the squash, and the cube is a child of the backflip. And so what this should allow us to do is, if I go to my squash and I go to the coordinates, in the scale parameters right over here, I'm in the coordinates tab, I want to squash this down on the Y. So that should squash it from the top and go up. So we can get that kind of squash and stretch motion. So I'm going to put that back to 1. And then the backflip, we're going to rotate it on the P rotation right there. So that should be doing a backflip from that position. And hopefully you can kind of just see that backflip kind of where that position is. And you can even just rotate this and just kind of test it and see if that's rotating from the area you would like. And who knows, we might even get into this and maybe want to adjust it a little bit more. But that's that. So I'm going to go back to 0 for that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to animate our Y position of the cube. And then we're going to get into squashing, and then we'll get into rotating. So we're going to animate the Y position first. And what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this top null so it grabs everything that's in there. We don't want to animate the Y on one of these other objects because it'll move the position of it outside of this main parent. So we're going to animate the squash position for our Y and also for squashing. So I'm going to start this on the ground. I'm going to rewind this. And I am going to go to, I'm in standard mode. I'm going to go over to animate. And I should mention that I'm using the old layout system, not the new Cinema 4D R25 layouts. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust this over a little bit. Okay. So we should be pretty good. And now we should have our timeline here. And you may have already been there, but if not, that's how you can get to it. And you can load that up right here. So we've got 2 timelines, and I'm going to rewind this. And so I'm going to click on this, and at 0, we're going to start on the ground, and then we're going to anticipate jumping up. So if you followed along with the bouncing ball tutorial, we're going to do a similar thing. We move forward, and we're going to record 3 keyframes with the same position on the Y. And that's so we can do a squash, pop back up, and go back up. But what we're going to do is have those 3 keyframes, and then after that, we're going to go up into the air. So we're jumping up, and I'll record that Y position. I'm on 12, and you can adjust that to a different keyframe if you want it to go faster or slower. And then we'll come back down to the ground, something like that. And actually, I could probably just put 0. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll record 3 keyframes for that Y. And we could do this a few more times if we wanted. We're just going to start with just doing 1 jumping up and then coming back down. And you could do it obviously more times than that. So let's just take a look at this. So this is our basic movement that we've got going on. So nothing too exciting, but at this point, a good idea is to check out the timing between your keyframes and see if this basic movement, the basic speed of this animation seems right. And this is always a good point to make those adjustments versus doing it later when we dial in our curves. And one of the reasons for that is once we start to dial in our curves, if we start moving keyframes around, the curves do get a little bit messed up. It's really not a huge deal to modify it, but it's just a little bit of a better workflow I've found if we do that basic kind of blocking in of the main movements first and then continue to fine tune later on. So the next thing we want to do is we want to do our little squash. So I'm going to come to this next keyframe, and I'm on the squash right here. And let's open this up so we can see this. So I'm on the squash position in the coordinates. There's our Y animation. And let's go over and let's do a little squash. So I'm going to squash this on the Y. So I'm going to record a keyframe there. And actually I should have done that on the very first one. So I'll record a keyframe there. We'll come to the next one, and I'm going to do 0.5. You could do more or less depending on how much you want to squash the object. And then it's going to pop back up right there. So put it back to 1, and then it'll go back up. And hopefully this makes sense why we're doing it this way, because if we didn't have these 3 keyframes, we don't want this squashing on its way up. So we want this movement that's separate from the actually moving up into the air, the squashing part. It just looks pretty weird if it's squashing in the air. So we're going to record that 1 in that position, go to the next keyframe. I'm going to put 0.5 again, click that, restore that keyframe, go to the next one, turn it back to 1, and record that keyframe. Let's rewind that. Check that out. So we've got that little pop going on, or little squash. I think the squash is happening just a little bit too quick. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to grab these keyframes. I'm going to move them out just a little bit, give them a little bit of breathing room. So I could have just done it this way at the beginning, but I like just to dial in some of that first movement and then go through and do that later. At this point, before we get into doing any kind of backflip, we can see that obviously this animation is not looking that good. And the biggest reason for that is our curves. So I'm gonna go make sure I'm clicked on the squash position. I'm gonna look down in our timeline, and I am gonna just open up this null that we call squash position, and I'm just gonna dial on the position, and then I'll dial on the scale. So if I click on the position Y, and I don't see my curves here, and if I click the H key, that's going to frame that up for me. That's the same as clicking this button right there. And if you don't see curves and you're just looking at keys, it may be because you are in keyframe mode right there. So you can go to that next button right over there and go to the curves. And so this is what our curve currently looks like, and we can make this look a lot better. So one thing with a jumping type animation, right here we've got this horizontal, which means there's absolutely no movement, and then the more vertical it goes, the faster it's going. So if you can see, I'm going to scroll in, I'm just using my scroll wheel, that this handle right here, there's just a little bit of ease in before it goes up, and it's pretty small. I'm going to click H to frame that up again. But one thing that will really help this is if I hold the shift key while this keyframe right there is selected, hold shift, and I just grab this, it breaks that tangent right there. And so what that does is it allows us to go, instead of any kind of easing like that, we're going to just go straight up. And so any kind of jump animation, like jumping up or jumping down, hitting the ground, we want this to be like a broken curve right here. We don't want it to have any kind of easing. It looks a lot better if we just break that, because then we're hitting something hard like the ground, or bending down and then jumping up with force. It kind of creates that kind of movement that we're going for. The more I pull this up, if I pull this up pretty far, we're going to shoot off the ground really fast, versus if we do something more like that, it's going to be slower because this line is going more vertical, which makes it go faster. So let's just try something like that. And this is at the beginning right here. Let's grab this so you can see this is this point of the animation. And I'm just kind of letting it play through. So that's looking pretty good. The weird thing is that we have is it looks like it's hitting something in the air, and instead of kind of floating through the air. And I like doing these animations that are a little bit more like a cartoon style, but that seems a little weird. But before I adjust that, I'm going to grab this keyframe, hold shift, and bend that one up too. So we have that when it hits the ground over there, we're doing that same kind of curve. It's that jumping type curve. There we go. So that's looking a little bit better there. And so one thing that we can do now is grab this middle keyframe, and I'm just going to pause this. And this part, just so we're on the same page, is the keyframe where the cube is up in the air. And so what we can do is we can create kind of a hanging in the air for a second type of animation by extending this part right here. And so I grabbed that keyframe, I'm grabbing this handle, and I'm just pulling these out. And so the more we pull these handles out, the longer this part of the curve stays horizontal, and which basically means that it's staying almost still for just a few seconds there before it comes back down. So let's rewind that and see what that looks like. So we've got that little bit of a hang time up there now too. So I like the way something like that looks. I don't like the way this curve looks right here. It just looks a little bit, like it's got a little bit of a weird shape there. And I guess I'm just kind of weird like that too, but I just want to try to fix that if I can. And I'm just going to kind of adjust this handle. And I might just pull this in just a little bit. And there's really nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I have found that the cleaner these curves look, the less like weird like kinks and less dramatic shapes in there. Actually, the animation just looks a little bit smoother. But again, it really does depend on what you're going for. And so now I could just come in and I can just fine tune these and get a curve that looks pretty good. And hopefully you can already see how much better that's looking. And one other thing we could try is sometimes if we adjust the timing of where this keyframe is, it can add a cool effect and just change things a little bit. So I'm just going to grab that keyframe and I'm going to hold the shift key, and it'll just keep it at that same position while I drag it this way. I can't drag it up and down, which is nice. I'm going to drag it over So it reaches that point later. Now I'm just going to see what that looks like just for the heck of it. And I kind of like how it takes a little bit longer to get up there. And it really, again, just depends on what type of animation you're doing. But a lot of times I like to come in and just try these, kind of moving these things around and see what they look like. And if I hold the shift key again, maybe I'll try the other way and just see what that looks like. Bring that so it goes up a lot quicker. And that's jumping up much quicker, and it is kind of messing up our curve right here. We could fix this by trying to adjust this one, but at a certain point, we have to actually adjust this one as well. And that will smooth that out. And I kind of like the way it looked the other way personally, so I'm just gonna grab that keyframe, hold shift, move it over, something like that. And I'm gonna pull that handle out again. Something like that. And if I hit the 0 key, while this keyframe is selected, it'll 0 this out. Hit the wrong key. Try that again. Hit the 0 key. And you might not have even noticed that. It was probably really subtle, but if I have a handle that's just a little bit crooked right there, and it's kind of messing up my animation, if I just click the 0 key, it just zeroes that out. And that key is also, let's see, I think it's this one right there. Yep. And so the next thing we want to do is go to our scale and click on the scale, and we see the curve, but it's all flat. So all we have to do is click the H key, and that'll frame that up. It just was zoomed out too far. And this is what our scale's looking like. And so let's think through this really quick. I'm going to rewind that. So as we're scaling going down, we probably want to ease into this, kind of how it is right now. And then, but when we go up, we're going to have this force pushing us up. And so we want to have it, instead of it easing right here, we want to have that as kind of a sharp curve too. So if I hold shift, I'm going to drag that. And so that way we're easing as we're bending, as this object is bending down. And then as it starts to go up, we're gaining more and more momentum going up, which should make this curve go up quicker. And if we want to exaggerate things, I can pull this one in a little bit more, and we can also grab this one, just extend that out. And this will just give us just a little bit more of a dramatic movement. This may or may not be what you're going for, or even what I'm going for. Let's just give it a shot. And it's one of these like subtle things, but I feel like sometimes these little subtle things do make a difference. And for instance, if I just grab this and we don't have any easing there, we can kind of check out what that looks like. And it's just going down quicker, but it is holding just a little bit on this part right here. And I do kind of like how it eases in a little bit. So something like that. Okay, and let's go over here. I'm gonna hold the 1 key just to click and pan over. And I'm going to fix these curves up. So this is kind of the opposite. As it's coming from the air, there's a lot of force pushing it down. So we don't want any easing right here. I'm gonna hold the shift key, break that tangent, pull that down. So the force from coming from the air, we want that to go fast, and then it's gonna come down. And I'm going to just pull that out a little bit, hit the 0 key, just to make sure that's level. I've kind of moved down so I can hold the H key and just pan back over. And then here, we do want some of that ease in. And right now I'm pulling this and you can see it's not making a difference. It's because we've kind of reached our maximum right here. So one other thing that I can do is I can actually hold the shift key here, and this breaks the tangents just like we were doing this kind of movement, but instead of moving it up, I'm gonna just try to move it horizontally so we get a little bit more slack right here, so we can pull that out more and just extend that more. And so I might even also just move that over a couple more and just give this a little bit more breathing room at the very end of our animation. Let's try that. There we go. And I might even exaggerate this even more. And this is just a personal preference. Just stylize this thing even more where it just pops up even slower at the very end there. I just kind of like the way that looks. And I'll give it maybe a little more room there. And I like the way that looks. And maybe we'll, instead of coming down so quickly right there, let's just try to go in more of like a linear type movement. And that just kind of softens that last part. I don't know if you can see that there, if you noticed it. And that will allow me to drag this out, and so it'll hold as we squash down. Fix that again. The last thing we want to do is we want to do a backflip. So I'm going to click on my backflip position. I think that it may look pretty good if we start the backflip somewhere right around that area and we flip, and then maybe we're still kind of flipped over and we're coming back down. So let's give that a shot. So I'm going to say something like that. We may move this around. I'm on the backflip position, not on the squash. And let's just see which one. Yeah, so we want to rotate the P. So I'm going to record 0 right there. And then I'm going to flip over, let's see, backwards 360 degrees. So I can just type in -360 and I'll record that. And let's just see what that looks like. I'm not sure. I just kind of eyeballed these where I thought that would maybe look good, but I think I could be wrong. Let's see. Maybe we can try giving this a little bit more keyframes. Let's just see what that looks like. And let's just see if we move this around. Just like to see what looks better or worse or different. So, you know, this is a different kind of flip right here than the one we had before. I think this one looks less natural. So let me, oops, I should probably pause this, but let me go back to somewhere like that. And so, you know, you can see that also gives it a little bit of a different look. And let's pause that and see where the point in which we flip is right about there. And that seems to me about right for maybe this type of object. Maybe I'll even pull this over a little more to see what that looks like. See, I think that's getting a little too close. That's where, if this was maybe gymnastics, they might lose some points there. So I think, let's go back. Okay. So let's go to the backflip position, rotation, click the H key, and this is what our backflip curve looks like. So let's think through this. If this was going to be a flip, the momentum right here, I think would most likely ease in and ease out like it is. However, I think that there would probably be more force right here as we're coming into that, right? I think. So let's try that. I'm going to grab that keyframe. I'm going to bend this up. Let me hit the H key so we can frame this up. So we're going to ease into this movement. And I could actually be wrong here. Maybe it's the other way around where we shouldn't be easing in. But I think we're gaining speed, and then we hit. And that seems right. Let's just see. I think we could probably do it a couple different ways. So some kind of curve like that. There we go. I like the way that looks. And it might be a little too close to the end. I'm going to pull it over just a little more. And one more over. Okay, there we go. I like the way that looks. So that is about it for this tutorial. And if you're using my template and you're using the standard renderer, you basically should be good to go to render. All you have to do is come up to this little gear icon right here. I'll pause this. And you could do a render. So all of this should be set up. The only thing you have to do is make sure you're in the Save tab right here. And you can give this the name. So call it Jump Up, whatever you want to call it. So you give it a name and you click these little 3 dots right there and you send it to somewhere on your computer or hard drive, wherever you want this to save to. So you choose that location, close it, and you click this middle button and it should start rendering your MP4 file. And if you're using a different render engine or you already have something else set up, you can just use that as well. In the next tutorial, we are going to go a little bit further into this whole bouncing type of an idea, and we are going to do a bounce and a bend, and it's kind of a floppy type animation. So we're going to use a bend deformer to add some floppiness to an object that's hitting the ground, and I will see you in that.